Baltimore City Schools reaches an alarming low in student performance.
As Project Baltimore's Chris Papps has learned, nearly half of high school students in Baltimore City this year earned a grade point average below a 1.
They take.
When Giovanni Patterson ran for Baltimore City Council president last year,
Yet, despite the amount of money they get, we don't see much change.
he ran on a platform that included accountability and education.
Our schools outspend 97% of other major school districts.
And when Project Baltimore showed him how Baltimore City students have been doing this year,
This is terrible.
here is how he reacted.
This is just further perpetuating the cycle of poverty, blight, despair.
This chart was assembled by Baltimore City Schools and obtained by Project Baltimore. It shows the average GPA for every high school grade in the city, freshman through senior. In the first 3 quarters of this past school year, according to the chart, 41% of all Baltimore City high school students earned below a 1.0 grade point average. In other words, nearly half of the roughly 20,600 public high school students in Baltimore earned less than a D average.
It's heartbreaking. If almost half of our kids are failing, what options do they have after high school? This is really disheartening. And it's sad to see this, man.
On the other end of this chart, 21% of city high school students earned a GPA of 3.0 or better, a B average. About half as many who earned below a D. We can also see the district lost more than 700 high school students during the first 3 quarters of this year. In January, City School CEO Dr. Sonia Santelises first sounded the alarm, saying the course failure rate for students had nearly doubled during the COVID shutdowns. A few months later, in May, North Avenue announced students would not be held back for failing classes. This most recent GPA data could show us why North Avenue made that decision. During the second quarter of the 2019-2020 school year, just before COVID hit, 24% of high school students had a GPA below 1. Now, it's 41%. City Schools declined an interview, but told us in a statement the COVID-19 pandemic created significant disruptions to student learning. Starting this summer and beyond, City Schools is providing students with a variety of opportunities to acquire the unfinished learning they lost.
It's not gone. It's not going anywhere.
City Council President Nick Mosby, who defeated Patterson in the election, is reportedly under investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice concerning campaign finances, business, and tax records. Project Baltimore emailed and called Mosby's office, requesting an interview to discuss these numbers concerning student GPAs. We never heard back.
These people don't care, man. They come from the same environment. You know, Nick Mosby is a product of Baltimore City Schools. Brandon Scott's a product of Baltimore City Schools, and they see what's going on. But then when you bring this to them, they don't care. They don't care at all. You have to raise the standard. Everyone should be speaking out about this.
Project Baltimore reached out to the other school systems in our area requesting their GPA data. We were told by all of them that it's not readily available. I'm Chris Papst, and this is Project Baltimore.
The clip you just heard was from a Baltimore City news station, and they were talking about the abysmal scores in the city of Baltimore, and that the rates of the scores have basically worsened. So the negative scores have doubled in a year. Now, that it was during COVID and the schools are out and remote learning is not something that we do well just yet. So I'm going to give them a break there. But Baltimore City Schools have been in trouble for a long time. You know, this is something where there's one kid that never had a grade above a D in his 4 years in high school, and they had to keep him back. And when I was perusing the PARCC scores, you know, the scores, national scores that test on proficiency and readiness for college, they had 2 reading scores, right? One was for 4th grade and one's for 8th grade. and they were 13 and 15% respectively, right? And so when you look at scores like that, and then you realize that only 10% of black boys read at proficiency level in 8th grade, is people notice that the abysmal state of schools and the learning of black children, and nobody's upset. I mean, nobody's upset. And when we're talking about equality and not getting paid for child support and not being able to find a husband or find a good man or not having fun or whatever, and they don't get upset about their own children not learning, and they really don't care. In fact, I looked at a couple of news reports. I didn't see one female that got upset about black children not learning. I've only seen a very few females, let's put it that way. I know there's Zakiya and there's a couple other black women that are actually outraged that black boys don't learn or can't read. And then we wonder, how come we don't get successful black men? You have a post-industrial society, and you have to be able to learn how to read. You have to be able to read, especially in this digital age. You can't read, you can't do anything. You're doomed to the bottom rung. You're doomed to depend on other people. You can't even accept payments without being able to read. You got to realize Baltimore is just 38 miles from Washington, D.C. It's not like they're that far out of the DMV area. They're not. They're almost a suburb of Washington, D.C., and the nation's capital, they're within the shadow of the nation's capital. And you would think that they're Detroit, because I actually looked at it. The only scores worse than Baltimore are Detroit and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, thousands of miles away. And Baltimore is in the shadow of Washington, D.C., which doesn't make sense. So we have the most educated class of females in the nation, supposedly, and the vast majority of children belong to women. You only have 10% of the children, less than 10% of children, I think it's like 9% of the children that belong to single fathers. 90% of black children have a mother in the home. And it's doubly that case for Baltimore. And it's not something that just started yesterday. This has been going on, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. The only time people really cared about school is when they couldn't drop their kid off to school and they couldn't go to work. That's when people started to care. Maybe COVID will do something. Maybe the pandemic and the children having to be at home and the parents having to be responsible for their children learning and keeping up the schoolwork. Now they know. But that's probably also the reason why the school district lost like 700 people, 700 kids, because they just dropped off because they didn't have a computer. There was no place for them to learn, and the parents didn't facilitate it. And this is a school district, I think, that spends, if I'm not mistaken, $21,000 per student. $21,000 per student goes into elementary education. Let that sink in. How much money does the state spend on the students per capita, right? $21,000 per student. And the state is not outraged. The federal government's not outraged because the federal government has to outlay all this money to these school districts. And this is embarrassing. This is worse than back in the 60s when most black kids, most black boys didn't make it past the 8th grade. And basically they're not making it past the 8th grade. Basically, they're making it all the way through the 12 years or 13 years in school and coming out with an 8th grade education. And like I said, this is the second story. Last year was a little boy, like I said, the boy that only passed 3 classes in 4 years of high school, only passed 3 classes. And the rest were basically fails. Now you have 41% of school children in a large city. It's not like Baltimore is this little dime city that only has 10,000 people. Baltimore has upwards of 700,000 people. They have major colleges. They have a couple of historically black colleges. They have all these federal resources, and this is the best they can do. And nobody is upset. Nobody's pumping the brakes. Nobody's heads rolling on the school board. The whole school board should be fired immediately. But nobody cares about the education of black children. They really don't. That's one thing that the poor people that just can't come out of slavery knew. If their race or their group was going to get better, they had to be educated as they could be. And they took time and resources to make sure that kid got an education. And these are people that couldn't read themselves. Now we have college-educated women that could care less about their kids' education. Boggles the mind. And in case you're wondering, PG County scores are not that far ahead of Baltimore City, another black county. And because I looked, I said there should be a big ass gap between Baltimore and Prince George's County, and there isn't. Sad state of affairs. I don't even know what to think about this. I'm so dejected that, I'm like Dark Knight. People will lose hope, because I'm starting to lose hope and starting to think that this whole mess is just gonna crash and burn. And maybe it should, because we've had 100 years to get this stuff together, and we've had 60 years of civil rights to attempt to get this stuff together. And at the end of the day, I don't think we really care. People say we want to be black, we want to keep our culture, we want to be successful, we want to build. But when the rubber hits the road, and simple things about like making sure your kids get a C average, not an A or a B, or excel, or basically, get PhDs and whatever, right? Just making sure our children get a C that can read at grade level with all the resources that we have around us. All you need is a $50 tablet and $20 a month on the internet. We're talking about an investment of what, $300 to ensure your kid gets an education? And we can't do that? I don't know, man. I don't know. Like I said, that it's not resources that our people lack, it's the will. It's what's between their ears and not what's between their wallets that our people lack. And I keep saying that. Nobody believes me, because everybody says we need more money, we need more resources. That's not what I'm seeing. I've seen poor immigrants come in with no money and menial jobs, and their children grow up and do better. It is what it is. It's just a mindset and a work ethic and a little discipline. And nowadays, it doesn't even take that much discipline. Anyway, that's all I got for this one. This is Beach Just Out, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.